Hey there, everybody. This is Dr. Gibbs. Um, so, last week we discussed PCOS and what is it and what's the hormone abnormality in PCOS. Um, and this week I want to go more into what you can do about PCOS, why you get PCOS, and things that you can do to manage it if you have it, that are more than maybe what your doctor has suggested to take care of that. So, if you are listening to this and you're not a physician, please keep in mind scientific proof is not nearly as black and white as people think. And in order to make treatment decisions for individual people, sometimes we have to consider evidence that's not nearly as absolute as we would like. So, this is not meant to be medical advice, and you should consult your own physician for any medical issues or diagnoses you may have. All right, so last time we discussed how insulin resistance is really the base hormone abnormality that leads to all the other problems in PCOS. Um, so, what's so wrong about having insulin resistance? If my blood sugars are fine, who cares? Well, unfortunately, high insulin levels in your body have a lot of different effects to which the body is not resistant, and it's not just PCOS. And so, all doctors really should care way more about this than we do, because there's brain effects, feeding behaviors and body weight and increases in beta amyloid and tau proteins, cognitive, executive function, learning, memory, mood changes, all kinds of stuff. And then GI effects. So it causes you to make more gastric acid. So a lot of people are on proton pump inhibitors now. But guess what those do? They block the absorption of your vitamins and your nutrients. So, and then there's hormonal effects, which um, we said that high cortisol reduces in elevated insulin levels, but elevated insulin levels feed back and cause even higher cortisol levels and epinephrine, among many others. So now we're even going in circles. And it's really, really important to break this cycle so that you can get better. All right, so the net GYN effects for women who have insulin resistance are as follows: early onset of periods or early menarche, hirsutism, meaning on your face, acne on your back, on your arms, on your chin, infertility, menstrual miseries, gestational diabetes, weight gain, and then we mentioned the hair loss, and then PMS, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, the growth of uterine fibroids and fibrocystic breast, as well as PCOS. So, what is causing this symptom pattern to manifest? Well, stress for one, and a high insulinemic diet, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. And unfortunately, genetics, because over 30% of people in the US have genes that make them particularly susceptible to insulin resistance. Um, and in ancient time, having this gene was really helpful because it kept us from starving to death when times got really lean. It made us really efficient at storing calories and energy in our bodies while calories were abundant, and then feeding them out over times when things got really lean. But even if you don't carry that gene, but especially if you do, here's a list of things that can push people towards PCOS. And most of them induce or worsen by higher cortisol levels. So we talked a while ago about the parasympathetic versus the sympathetic nervous systems. And your sympathetic nervous system is the one that causes the fight or flight reaction: fight, flight, fawn, freeze. That's what we call it in psychology circles, versus the parasympathetic, which is rest and digest, breathe and feed. But anyway, one popular podcaster that I listen to calls these the hormone deal breakers, as in, if you have one or many of these, then it's really going to jack up your hormones. Okay, so number one is inadequate or disrupted sleep. And I said an awful lot about that over the last couple weeks in these same lives. So you can go back to listen to that if you like. or I'll give you a couple of references you can look at later in the talk. And then over-exercise. So people who over-exercise to the point of overstressing their body and then undereat with regards particularly to fatty meals or healthier fats, or people who have cycles of calorie restricted diet and then weight regain and then calorie restricted and then weight regain. Those are really, really stress inducing and very hard on your body. And then other nutrient deficiencies, because we live in America and we don't eat a lot of whole real food as a population anymore. We are over reliant on processed convenience foods that are high in sugar and starch and devoid of fiber. And then, our parents got taught, I don't know, yours it did, but mine sure did. Our parents got taught that high fat food was terrible for you. Oh, it causes all kinds of terrible things. So we got this idea that we should eat low fat foods. And the problem with those is, of course, that they're all high in sugar and starch and devoid of fiber, as well as no healthy fat, as well as no unhealthy fat. Anyway, use of prescription antibiotics or steroids and not eating plenty of fiber can cause an unhealthy microbiome. That's a big buzzword these days, is to pay attention to your microbiome. So eating fermented foods and probiotics can really help that. And I find a lot of my patients do much better once they have started taking a probiotic. And then thyroid and adrenal problems, which can be caused by these stressors, but can also turn around and cause them to get worse. So, so thyroid problems that are unrecognized, and then adrenal fatigue or adrenal insufficiency that is also gone unrecognized. A white blood cell count over 8 or under 5, which indicates that you may have a chronic infection in your body. And then chronic negative thoughts. So your mindset really plays a huge role in how you manage the stressors that come along in your life. You've probably noticed there are some people that really bounce back well from what we would look at as negative or traumatic events. And then there are other people who have much less serious trauma from an outside perspective, who really just get devastated by that. And a lot of that has to do with a negative thought pattern. And then there's just a couple more. And one of them is toxins and xenoestrogens, meaning hormone disruptors. And, we're all eating more food that's wrapped in plastic and exposed to PCBs and bisphenol and all kinds of toxins in our food and our water, in our air, that, our parents really weren't exposed to. And then trauma in early life and lack of family support is the last one here, of these big hormone deal breakers, as they're called. So if you have some of those or any of those, obviously there are some that you can do stuff about. And I strongly encourage people to pick one and get started. But anyway, let's talk about treatment of PCOS, because in my opinion, oral contraceptives are really not the preferred modality. One, they increase insulin resistance, and two, they don't fix the non-ovulatory cycles, because the artificial progesterones actually, or the artificial progestins, I should say, block your menstrual cycles as if you were in menopause. And so real progesterone is actually a key thing to help, because it can actually balance that allopregnanolone, which when it's too high causes many of the brain type symptoms that go with PCOS. All right, so the first thing that I recommend that people do is work on fixing their thyroid and adrenal issues first. And you can do that with the help of an integrative practitioner, or there are lots of information in the videos that I've been giving before about things that you can do to help your thyroid and adrenals work better. And then managing your stress is really a big one, and managing your inflammation is a big one. We're also going to talk a bit about exercise. We're going to talk about a low insulinemic diet. We're going to talk about sleep just a tad, since I've already kind of gone over that a lot. And then I'm going to talk about some supplements and maybe even some prescriptions that may be helpful. And the reason I'm talking about the lifestyle modifications first is because they've really been proven to be 3 to 10 times more effective than any medication for treating insulin resistance. Since insulin resistance is the base abnormality here, that's where you need to focus your attention. So exercise is probably number one. And I'm not going to say a whole lot about exercise. I'm not an exercise physiologist. And there are a lot of other great podcasters out there that talk about exercise, except active working muscles need a lot less insulin to take up glucose than non-working muscles. So if you look in JAMA, they are still recommending the dose of exercise as 3.5 hours a week. But that's old. That's from 30 years ago, and it's outdated. But despite that, decreased activity in one study I found doubled the insulin levels that looked at nothing versus just walking. But it really isn't necessary to do it that way, because there are now lots and lots of people out there that are advocating high intensity interval training. So even 3 minutes a week of this high intensity training can give the same benefit as 10,000 steps a day. So there's a nice video. It's called The Truth About Exercise. It's on Vimeo, and you can pull it up and watch it. I really like this video, except for one thing, and that is that they show the subject eating a very large English breakfast, which is extremely high in carbs. And they vilify the fat that he's eating while saying nothing at all about all the starchy carbs and sugar that he's eating. So that's actually a nice segue into the section that I'm going to talk about eating and diet. So when you think about having insulin resistance, you don't need a diet for now. What you need is an eating life plan, and you can use diet diaries. Those are really helpful to help monitor your unconscious stress eating, and you can get coaching for that as well. But a low insulinemic diet, meaning a diet that helps keep your insulin levels low, is not necessarily the same as a low glycemic diet because of non-nutritive sweeteners. So the sweet taste of saccharin, or even monk fruit or stevia, even these natural non-nutritive sweeteners create a spike of insulin initially when you eat them that is exactly the same as what you get when you eat sugar, and maybe even worse, because some of them are even more sweet to your tongue than sugar. And that's a double whammy, because when your high insulin crashes your blood sugar down, then you just have to eat more to keep that sweet tooth alive. And really, just 10 days of no sweets and no starches can really help that sweet tooth start to fade. And I'm not advocating a no carb diet. I don't necessarily think that's necessary. As a matter of fact, I think there are a lot of diets where there's up to 40% carbs that are okay. You just need to watch what kind of carbs they are. Here's another thing. If you're going to eat some carbs, eat your protein and your fat first. Eggs, meat, nuts, seeds, legumes. And My personal favorite, avocado, which is just wonderful because it's fat and fiber and it tastes delicious without a significant amount of carbs in there. And you want to eat plenty of non-starchy vegetables and pick, a rainbow of colors: green, yellow, orange, red, purple. Some whole grains are okay, but these really need to be whole grains, not whole wheat ground up into small particle flour, which becomes rapidly released starch. So you really want to avoid these rapid release carbs: the white flour, sugar, pasta, bread, grits, potatoes. And then preserved and concentrated fruit are also really, really high in sugar and have had a lot of the fiber boiled and strained out of them. So I don't actually recommend concentrated fruit jams, even if they are no sugar. Eat a whole piece of fruit if you're going to eat a piece of fruit, but limited. Don't eat 5 or 10 a day. Eat 1 or 2 really at the most. So people are like, well, but isn't fat bad for me? And I'm like, newer data really shows that it's not. And many kinds of fat are really good for you, and they absolutely don't raise your insulin levels. In particular, omega-3 fatty acids lower lipid levels and help fight inflammation. Now, there are many thyroid diets that really insist on complete elimination of gluten and dairy. And if you're sensitive to these, I can see why, because they do tend to cause gut inflammation, and leaky gut is a big reason why we think people end up with autoimmune thyroid disease. And then these autoimmune paleo diets are really acceptable, and there are lots of books written on those subjects. And really slow released carbs are the key here, because how quickly the sugar is released into your system really makes a difference in how much insulin you make. And all of these diets are very similar to what's been characterized as the Mediterranean diet. So the caveman diet, the paleo diet, Schwartz bean, South Beach, Candida diet. So if you look up a Candida removing diet, you're going to be golden there. All right. So sleep debt. Really, sleep debt is a phenomenal trigger of high insulin levels, because sleep debt causes, after even just a night or so, 40% decrease in glucose tolerance, unless you're getting at least your 8 hours of sleep. So if you missed the last 2 discussions earlier in June, go back and watch those. But I do have 2 really good book recommendations that you can read. One of them is by T.S. Wiley, and the name of that book is Lights Out. And then the next one that I really like is by Matthew Walker, and that one is called Why We Sleep. And they're both phenomenally good, good reading as well. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty here and talk about supplements. So there is an excellent blocker of 5-alpha reductase. And remember, last week we said 5-alpha reductase is responsible for many of the symptoms that you get, because 5-alpha reductase is elevated when your insulin levels are high, and it takes your progesterone and it makes allopregnanolone out of that, and it takes your testosterone and it makes dihydrotestosterone out of that. Those are responsible for a lot of the symptoms. So if the name of this supplement is called saw palmetto, and if you will take 160 milligrams of that twice a day, that's a great starting dose for this. It is not a really fast thing, because the 5-alpha reductase really has to be gradually eliminated out of your system. But you can really reduce a lot of the symptoms of PCOS with that supplement alone. Of course, remember that I said before that 3 to 10x from diet and lifestyle over supplements and drugs. Okay, next one is chromium picolinate, and this is a blood glucose lowering agent. You can do for the first week 500 micrograms of chromium picolinate twice a day, and then after a week or so, increase to once a day. So this is an essential trace mineral that your glucose transporter function needs. And the trace mineral supplement that I like only has 200 micrograms of chromium in it. And so if you feel like you might have insulin resistance, adding an extra chromium picolinate supplement is very helpful. And then vanadium is also contained in my trace mineral supplement that I recommend. And that is actually pretty adequate in that trace mineral supplement. Now, my preference for helping control insulin resistance by lowering glucose uptake is prescription metformin, which of course works best with the measures we talked about above, but you can also use over-the-counter supplement called berberine. And that's really going to be about it for now. I actually have a whole other talk coming up about insulin resistance at some future point, because this is not just a women's issue. It is a huge cause of low T in men. And so I do intend to come back and talk about that as well. So that's it for now. I'm Dana Gibbs, and I'm an integrative physician in North Texas, and I help people address their thyroid and other hormone imbalances. If you have a question you'd like to see me address on a future live session, you can email me at drgibbs, drgibbs, at danagibbsmd.com. And if you're a thyroid or chronic fatigue sufferer in North Texas and you want a caring doctor to help you resolve your exhaustion, frequent illness, or other hormonal irregularities, come sign up for a new patient evaluation with me now at my website, www.danagibbsmd.com. All right, you guys, have a great evening. Bye-bye.